So I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about joining data, particularly when you have attribute data that you're working with to join together. So you're making the join based on tables. Could be you have a GIS layer where you have a bunch of locational information about your features, and then you have your spreadsheet, which you want the values, the attributes within that spreadsheet to be a part of that layer. So you want to add those without having to manually enter everything. That whole process is called joining, okay? There's also the process of joining two layers themselves. That's one thing, but in this case, we're talking about joining specifically the tabular information, really copying it from one place and merging it into an existing GIS, layer of data. So how this works, it's extremely common type of process, especially when you're working with various data sources. And that's going to be almost every time, right? When you start doing this, not from an instructor given data that's handed to you, but you really have to become a little bit of a detective and piece these things together, right? So the joining process is important to understand. The theory behind it, really what you're going to be doing is you're going to be cross-referencing multiple data files using common attributes. Okay, so the common attribute, we call that the identifier. Okay, so the identifier is going to be the link, really, that takes spreadsheet and layer and connects the two things together, right? The common identifier. Okay, so yeah, joining these external data files with your internal GIS data. Now, the way that this works is, like I said, requires that each data have at least one common field. So your identifier is going to be a common list of records. So a common field, right? A common column of attributes. So that's your primary key identifier. And you have to have that to make the link actually work. If without that, you can't just stamp one versus the other because it won't really understand, it needs a link between the two things. In order for this to happen, let's see. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So if I have to join the GIS layers, it's important that, I guess I'll get to this in a minute. I have it written down at a different point. Let's kind of just continue on like I have here in the text for a second. When you're joining these data files, once they're linked, the joins, the process, the join, okay, that's the name of the process. The join can be a temporary thing or it can be made permanent. So if it's temporary, it's, for some one-off analysis of something. Commonly, though, you're going to say, I want this to be a permanent fixture. So I'm going to save the join and actually create a copy or a new version of the old GIS layer with my new attribute information joined in there. So you don't actually erase the old stuff or override it, but you create a copy of it with the new stuff in it. That would be the permanent version. So let's see. There's these four kind of steps that are very common when it comes to joining these file types. So, your external file could be something like a database, an ASCII, which is a common text file. These are common text files. Could be an Excel file. That's probably the most common, at least where things start at, an Excel spreadsheet or something like a Microsoft Access file. But yeah, we walk through and we do these 4 things, right? We load the external file that you want to join. So imagine that your GIS layer is already in there. You've got that ready to go. That's your internal file. You load in the external file, and then it's just sitting. It doesn't actually populate anything on the map. It's just sitting there. It's part of your group of layers, right? Then by selecting the 2 things, you're gonna run the process called join. There's a geo process called join. So you run that process. It's going to ask you a series of criteria to meet. And so really the key one is the major important one in there is to identify the same key identifiers, right? So the common fields. I know I'm sounding a bit repetitive here, but as you go through and you do that, then you verify that everything worked. So I know that those are some kind of very high up here explanations. Let's try to break that down a little bit more, okay? So if we look at some examples here, I know that these are very, not the clearest pictures in the world to make out, but I'm talking about figure 4.1, which is here, okay? So imagine that we've got a layer that's got a bunch of parcel information in it, houses or subdivisions or something like that on the left side. And then we've got a spreadsheet on this right side that's got also the same type of stuff, right? They're 2 separate files, but essentially they're listing the same types of information, right? So let's see, assessor's parcel number. Yeah. The spreadsheet field name, like for example, on the spreadsheet has the name at the top of the column, APN _ NUM. So it's APN number, right? The parcel number. Whereas the layer only has APN for the name of the field, which is fine. That's okay. It's not that, well, first and foremost, identifying those 2 fields as being the same. And here's the trick, not that they have the exact same field title or field name, okay? APN and APN num are 2 different things. But what's important here is that they have the same values. So it's the same column, or at least the same, or at least, some of the same values to link together, okay? So in this case, imagine in theory that APN and APN num over here have the exact same numerical values, or at least close to, right? You could have 100 over here and 50 over here. It'll probably still work. I know it will work. It'll just kind of bring over the leftovers, and it'll create a little kind of a bunch of blank records where they didn't link, but that's okay. It still works. So yeah, identifying or locating the identifiers is the first key, part of this process. Now, once that happens, you see here how things are. They don't have to be in the same order, right? That doesn't necessarily matter because spreadsheets can be ordered however you want, actually. And that's what we see here, how the links are being kind of connected like this. But yeah, like I said, 2 files, even though the field names are not identical, the GIS will be able to join these 2 files together, provided the values under the 2 fields under the 2 field names match. So that's really important. Okay. If a match is successful, your 2 files will be joined together into a single file. So I know that that's not the easiest thing to make out visually, but this would be the example of the join parcel layer, which now contains all of the information in the spreadsheet, the additional fields. So maybe there's, I don't know, lot size and street address and other things that don't already exist in the GIS layer, but now they are merged in there. Okay, so you're not going to get a duplicate of the APN, but you're going to get everything else from the spreadsheet merged right over into that GIS layer. Okay. And so that becomes part of the attributes of the location features, right? When you click on a selection or you try to do a query, now you could query based on the spreadsheet information as well that was just added there, right? So this is really powerful stuff. And like I said, common, I'm saying the word common a lot here, but this is common types of occurrences and techniques that you'll run into as a GIS professional. Okay, so now the last part said verify everything works. There's going to be many, many times that, as simple as that sounded, you can't accomplish it, okay? At least the first go of your process, your join process. So what you're going to do is try to evaluate how to make things communicate well together so that the link is, completed. The highest probability that a broken link is going to exist is due to a file format from the spreadsheet, file format miscommunication, okay? Unreadable, essentially, is what I'm saying there. So GIS, Pro is getting better at this. And they're trying to continually improve upon that because they know something like Excel is the, most ubiquitous type of spreadsheet file format in the world. So that's getting easier to work with. However, one solution to kind of work around, say if an Excel file doesn't work, is to simplify. So like, I don't want to say dumb. I hate saying dumb down because that makes it sound like I'm taking things away or making the data less important. But I mean dumb down in terms of taking the Excel file and turning it into a simpler file format that GIS can read without really any issues. Okay, so the simpler the file format is, the easier time GIS is going to have, is what I'm saying. Now, okay, the most common, or let's see, data files, So yeah, converting to a DBase or an ASCII, ASCII, okay, which is essentially a text, when you open up a text file, a text reader, basic code, that's, what you can consider an ASCII file, okay? So, yeah, and let's see, converting a Excel spreadsheet to an ASCII file, it's not a difficult process whatsoever, but that's going to make things much simpler in terms of converting that file from one place to the other, to joining into GIS. So when it comes to ASCIIs, here's another thing to consider, right? There are different variants of ASCIIs, ASCII formatting that can occur. So you got to pay attention to that as well. So you got to know how your ASCII file itself is actually formatted. I know I'm saying file format. I'm saying the particular ASCII has a different, ways of formatting itself. And those are these examples, okay? So there's the white space delimited variant of an ASCII file, which is, for all intents and purposes, a space delimited ASCII file, okay? So like, for example, you have, say each one of these would be a particular field. So like M1, P1, M2, maybe that's a label number or something like that, right? Then between the M and Betsy Burns, there's a space there, right? There's a space in between those things. Now, Betsy and Burns should have a space as well, but because this is a space delimited file format, if you put a space, that would actually turn Betsy and Burns into two separate columns, if that makes sense, right? So putting an underscore is like a substitute for a space in this case, because spaces are our delimiters of our various columns, which are the fields. So in this case, we've got, okay, 1, 2, Okay, 3, 4, 5 columns to work with, 5 fields, right? So some type of yes, no response, and then could be some type of coordinate maybe, or something else that's quantitative. Anyways, that's a space delimited, okay, or white space delimited. Now, the space quote, okay, delimited means that instead of using an underscore or underscores to emphasize, 2 different words or more than one, could be 3, 4, 5, or however many is in a phrase. You still use spaces, but you put quotation marks around the subject. So in this case, the names, right? Betsy and Burns have quotation marks. That lets the file format know that lets the file reader know that Betsy Burns or Frank Aldrich are one record, okay, are in the same record. So, okay, the other way to separate things is with tabs, okay, the tab, literally using the tab button on the keyboard, but yeah, you see what happens there when you do something like that, right? Tab is a much wider space in between. So, yeah, let's keep going. The last one is called the comma delimited, or the comma quote, or the, we're looking at a version of a comma quote, or a comma separated value, okay, or CSV value. So comma quote would be just like we looked at, but instead of like what we looked at with the space quote, but instead of spaces, we have commas. Okay, so there's actually no spaces here. Well, I guess the space exists between Betsy Burns. So yeah, you can have it be this like this. And between the fields, it's a comma, right? It's a comma. Now with two words and a space in between, that's where we put a quotation there. If we remove the quotation, we could use underscores. That works as well. That would be more commonly known as, that would be the more commonly known comma separated value. So either one works. Here's the thing. I personally, okay, my personal preference is to go with the comma separated. So let me show you what that would look like. Something like this. The quotes, in my opinion, make things look a little busy. Okay, so I like my ASCII files formats to be formatted like this one here. Okay, so the reason I like the commas is because it keeps the fields nice and tight together. And the thing I have a problem with the space anytime I'm using a space is that to me, my eyes instinctually want to separate the, whatever those words are into 2 separate things. So having them close together, but then with a comma, again, to me, makes things the most legible. I found that also, just for preferences and the way that like my particular workflow and techniques go, comma separated has the least chance of failure when it comes to conversion, especially when it comes to joining, the joining operation. So yeah, I would say that concludes this part for what you need to know, in particular, these different ASCII file types, these different ASCII variants are important. Understand that that it's the similar records are your identifiers, not necessarily the field names. Okay, that's important. And just in general, kind of like what the technique and workflow is of joining data. Okay, all right, that's going to conclude it. Thanks.